today, as well as media who have joined us in cyberspace across the continent and in the United States. And I now invite you to engage with our panel, as well as scientists who are in our audience and who you may have spotted in the course of this morning, and to do so for the next 30 minutes. I'd like to start with the group in person and invite a round of 3 questions. I'll ask each questioner just to introduce themselves fully, as your question itself is part of the history we are documenting here today. So I'd like to start with the group to my right before we move online. May I have any takers? And we have microphones to help you.
Your Excellencies, it's Jack Dutton from AFP. And the first question is just to check a fact. Is this the first facility in Africa to manufacture COVID vaccines from start to finish? And what are your production aims in terms of number of vaccines and when you wish to produce them? Thanks.
You want me to answer? I'm on my mic here. So, yes, I think one of the opportunities is to take vaccines completely from start to finish. And the opportunity here is we're going to be generating the self-amplifying RNA all the way from scratch, all the way to full finish, and then lyophilization. So this campus, there's this building and the building next door. And the idea is to generate 1 billion doses by 2025. We feel very confident that with the know-how and the GMP manufacturing capabilities we really have for this RNA and this nanolipid cap structure that we've been invented by IDRI, that this can be produced in this facility as we stand and speak. The reason for our confidence is you see those clean rooms behind you. We've now made a decision to find South Africans that actually can generate their own supply chain all the way. Those clean rooms behind you were built from the scratch, from the polystyrene all the way to the walls. And what you see behind you was, I put out a challenge that was established and built in 2 days. The ability now to build these clean rooms across the whole sequence of making billions of 1 billion doses is real. We feel that we can do that by 2025.
And when do you want to establish the first dose, if you like? Would that be this year or next year? Or?
Mr. President, I think, Mr. President, do you have a comment?
Thanks.
No, I wanted to respond in part, and I shouldn't stop you from asking him about the next question, but I wanted to add to the first question. Is this the first real vaccine facility? I would say yes, from drug substance. Because the other facilities that we have, we find that the drug substance is manufactured elsewhere, then brought here and then fill and finish. Now, the demand that we've been making at the World Trade Organization, initiated by India and South Africa, is that we want the world, or those who have the capacity to manufacture the drug substance, to transfer their technology so that we are able to manufacture ourselves the drug substance. And this is where the real challenge has been. We want to migrate from just doing fill and finish and be able to manufacture the drug substance ourselves. So this will, on the continent, be the first. And of course, the collaboration that we are having with the WHO on the NRA process is going to lead to that as well, with BioVac having been initiated by Africa. So this is really going to take us to another level.
Thanks. And just the last question is, when do you expect the first doses to be produced?
So that's what we're moving at lightning speed. The architectural design has already been completed. I'm needing to move together with the permitting organizations of this facility. And we think within literally 6 months of completion of the clean room, the first clean room, we'll do this in modules. And we hope that within the year, quite literally within the year, the first drug substance will be produced in this facility.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you, Doctor. Artie?
So much. My name is Artie Mtwana from Newsroom Africa. A very simple question, given the high unemployment rate in South Africa. How many South Africans are estimated to be employed through this collaboration? Thank you.
Within the manufacturing facility here, to go from drug substance and finish full, 400 to 600 South Africans would be needed to actually manage and manufacture at least these billion doses. So between these two plants, now the opportunity to take these two plants and expand upon them. But we want to start first with these two plants, these two facilities. And we think between 400 to 600 people would be needed to actually manufacture that number of doses.
Thank you. I see I have another hand in Brackengate.
Good afternoon. My name is Mariska Botha. I'm from the SABC. Dr. Soon-Shiong, you said something very interesting. Do you view the vaccines that has been developed up until now as a waste of time and resources, because your approach is very different? Your approach is to stopping the virus in its tracks, as opposed to giving antibodies to protect from severe illness and death, which is the vaccines we have now.
I think it's very important for me to emphasize quite the opposite. That it's so important for you to be vaccinated. That these vaccines that were there played a very important role as I would say, not as a stopgap measure, but as first generation, because it did absolutely reduce death. And it does continue to do so. So I want to make sure that people understand that you need to be vaccinated. Unfortunately, two things happen. The antibodies wane and the viruses mutate, and you get yourself into a spiral, which then opens up the opportunity for the second generation vaccine. So the first generation vaccine was absolutely not a waste of time. However, we needed to, in parallel, I believe, have focused on second generation vaccines so that we're there to stop the transmission. But again, with the leadership of the President and the ministers and SAPRA, I think we can actually leapfrog that opportunity from this facility.
I just have a follow-up question. It sounds like you had a bit of opposition to this, but you found a home for this project again in your place of birth. Why do you think there was so much opposition to what you were trying to establish and create on a broader platform?
You know, the evolution of science takes a long time for people to adapt. Vaccinology for 40 years have been based on antibodies. And when you have a flu vaccine that you take every year because it changes, but in the face of the pandemic, you can't do that. So we spent 10, 15 years trying to show that while antibodies are important, T cells are what kills. And we came from the position of cancer. But we also then took that same technology and had to put it into vaccines. So today, we just presented data for our pancreatic cancer using the same vaccine technology, where we've now over doubled survival rate that just made public this morning of metastatic pancreatic cancer. That technology is what we've adopted into vaccinology. And that's been really the difficult thing for people to really grasp at the regulatory level, at the science level, at the implementation level. Having said that, we started this in the United States, showed the T cells, but it became very clear that the opportunity to move this across the globe, especially coming home. And then when I saw the need, the inequities, I call this vaccine apartheid that was happening here on this continent. And with the encouragement of President Ramaphosa, I said, this is what we needed to do. And we moved our focus to South Africa and Africa.
Thank you, Doctor. And I don't want us to miss out on that remarkable survival rate you just mentioned. So, well done and thank you. I'd now like us to go to Sophie Mokoena of the South African Broadcasting Corporation, who joins us online. Sophie, are you there and unmuted?
Yes, thank you so much. My question, the first one is directed to Dr. Xiong. Doctor, 2 years on, we are battling this pandemic. There are speculations that we are now moving to a different phase where one can say now the virus has become endemic, and it is almost at a point where it's almost dying down, and we see around the world the complacency, people not using masks and all of that. As a scientist, what's your view? And to President Ramaphosa, Mr. President, you pointed out the role you are playing on the continent to try and pull the continent together to fight this pandemic, but also to be ready for future challenges. But there seems back home a different view from ordinary South Africans in terms of how we interact with our own peers on the continent, which, if not attended to, it may spiral to a xenophobic, where people are questioning other Africans in terms of what they are doing in the country. And this facility has to support the entire continent. How do you sell this facility to the entire continent when we are engulfed by these concerns of ordinary South Africans in terms of the role of our compatriots from other countries in South Africa? Thank you so much.
Well, the question with regard to should we be complacent? And sadly, I don't think so. There's a lot of things we don't know yet. There's truly, sadly, the opportunity for Omicron and Delta to what we call recombine. The concern about Omicron was the reason maybe you have a lower infection because it just affects the throat versus Delta that affects the lungs. But Omicron is 75 times more infectious than Delta. Imagine what happens when Omicron and Delta come together, which viruses do. So I do not think we can be complacent. In fact, I think this is a lesson that everything we thought about COVID is been different. I think what we also haven't realized compared to influenza or any other infectious disease, that the virus goes after your blood vessels. And sadly, your blood vessels in every part of your body: kidneys, pancreas, brain, heart. That's why we have heart disease. That's why you could have dementia soon. We don't know. So these are the kinds of concerns, not to be alarmist, but we have to stop this pandemic and we have to stop an endemic. And the only way to do it is to kill the factory. And to kill the factory sounds like a broken record. You need T cells. The second question is, Your Excellency, think but how this facility would support Africa.
Second question is political, so don't go there.
Well, I will not.
You're asking how would we sell this facility, to other Africans or countries in Africa. It's very simple. This is Dr. Soon-Shiong is establishing a chain of these facilities. And I'm rather pleased that he's not only going to set up this facility in his own home country. I'm glad that he has started here at home, but he's going to expand. He's going to go to Botswana. He's going to go to to Ghana, he's going to go to Kenya, and he's going to go to Uganda. Whilst as South Africans, we may be tempted to be jealous and say, no, don't go elsewhere. We are saying we are Pan-African. We're Pan-Africanist in our approach. And that is why we should be proud as South Africa that we have been asked to be the champion, not necessarily myself as Cyril Ramaphosa, but as South Africa to be the champion for COVID-19. And that in the work that we are doing at the AU level, we are leading with the process of collaboration. The commission, for instance, that we set up only has 1 or 2 South Africans. And the other people who are on that commission are spread throughout the continent, which confirms our Pan-Africanist roots, that we want what is done with regard to healthcare to be across the continent. Now, as South Africa as well, we appreciate, recognize, embrace the role that is played by scientists, academics, and many of our universities have a number of scientists and academics and professionals from various African countries, which confirms once again, as a sector which Dr. Nzimande can speak to, our Pan-Africanist approach. Added to that is that we have become a magnet and a hub for African students from other African countries who come and study here. And they get scholarships, they get support and assistance. And this notion that we are xenophobic needs to be debunked, because we are not. South Africans are not xenophobic. South Africans are embracing, and we have been like that from time immemorial. Of course, like in any other country, there will be reactions to this and that at certain moments. And sometimes we become too focused on what happens on our own country. We need to look at the continent in its totality, in the way that it deals with people from other countries. Various countries on our continent embrace people from other countries, and so do we. So in this field, I am particularly proud of the fact that we are Pan-Africanists, and in fact, in our advocacy for self-reliance when it comes to manufacturing of vaccines, we as South Africa have been leading the charge that other countries on our continent should have the capability to manufacture vaccines and also to develop the skills that are necessary so that they can do precisely what Dr. Soon-Shiong is saying. So South Africans are not xenophobic. South Africans embrace people from other countries, and we shall continue to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd now like to go to Christian du Plessis. Christian.
Hello, Mr. President. This is Christian du Plessis from Netwerk 24. Mr. President, there has been calls for the ending of the national state of disaster, seeing that the current wave of the Omicron variant has been relatively light compared to previous waves, and we haven't seen the overwhelming of hospitals. Now, Mr. President, why haven't we lifted the national state of disaster, and by when do you think this might happen? Thank you.
I think you're a proxy for Premier Alan Wynne. He has been the one voice and he will say he's not the lone voice for advocating that we should lift the state of disaster. And we are on record as having said we are examining how best we should handle the state of disaster in this period where the infections have tapered down, and to see the efficacy of using the state of disaster legislation or utilizing other measures. And the National Coronavirus Command Council is examining exactly that to see whether we can use health protocols, health regulations, or whatever to move forward in our management of this pandemic. Now, many have challenged, even in the courts, the utilization of the state of disaster. But I think since the disaster descended on our country, we've managed the process rather well, utilizing this instrument. And of course, there is a good argument to be put forward that now that we are where we are, should we not examine and look at other methods, other instruments that can be utilized? And I'd like to see this as a collective process. And yes, because we are a free country, people have all the right to advocate, even whether you're premier or not, or yourself, advocate for the dropping of the state of disaster instrument. We are government. We've got to be very rational in everything that we do. So we are examining that, and maybe you'll be one of those lucky ones that your desires will be fulfilled soon, if in the end the NCCC recommends to Cabinet that we should drop that. And if not, then we will have a very rational explanation to say why we should continue with the state of disaster legislation. So be patient. All things do happen at the right time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have our last online question is Claudia Bro, and then I'll come back to Brackengate by the end of the next 10 minutes or so. Thank you. Claudia.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm reporting for the German newspaper, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung from South Africa. I have three very short questions to Dr. Soon-Shiong. First of all, how much will be invested or has been invested already in the campus, and is that only private investment? And the second one, I would be interested, the COVID vaccines that should be produced there, have they passed already the test phase and some regulatory processes? And then I'm interested whether NantWorks has other similar production facilities globally, and how does the South African one compare to these? Thank you very much.
So if I could hear the question, I understand the question is how much we think we're reinvesting. And the answer is, we made this actually very public probably 6 months ago, that it would take at least 3 billion rand. And we think this facility alone, together with equipment and the 2 facilities, from a corporate investment, close to 3 billion rand, just to actually have it fitted out and run. Then on top of that, on the philanthropic side, our family and our foundation have really committed, internally at least, at discussions at the board level, of another 1 billion rand. We started with a very small start, just so we understand the organization of this 100 million rand for the scholarships. It is our intention as a family, as well as my corporations, to truly make the investment in my home. South Africa is our home, and this is an opportunity for us, really, I think, together with this kind of leadership, to make an impact, not only in the country, but the continent. I've learned to listen to the Pan-African issue. These diseases are ignored. Cervical cancer, Burkitt's lymphoma, cancers that affect Africans in Africa. And, you know, I'm really such a pleasure to be around people like Dr. Casper, Dr. Gray, Dr. Linda Grigg, where we're talking about HIV. So these are the kinds of things that we as a entity will invest not only our resources, our know-how and our capital into addressing these issues, starting with South Africa, but really addressing Africa.
Thank you, Dr. Patrick. We have another question in Cape Town. Two.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Julie Shire for CGTN, China Global. I wanted to ask you if this is a new era for Africa, and will this bring us on par? Will it bring the continent on par with other countries, for instance, like China and India and other developed countries?
Yes, I would concede that, yes, this is a new era, but much more than that, because in achieving our objectives, we have made it clear that we want to collaborate, that to achieve those objectives, we will not be able to do it alone. We accepted that we have a lot to contribute as a continent, but we want to work with others on an equal footing without even the shackles of any measure of colonial colonial thinking. We want to be able to be treated with the respect that should be there, because we see ourselves as being equal, much as we have to get technological advancement from others. We also have a contribution to make in many, many, many facets. And you mentioned China, you mentioned India. They are already part of our scheme. South Africa being a member of BRICS, we already are on the way to establish, for instance, a vaccine facility in South Africa as part of BRICS. So that shows the collaboration between those three countries, including Russia and Brazil. So indeed, it's a new era and much more. And as South Africa, we will also be utilizing that leverage of the BRICS vaccine formation to advance our own continent. Because as South Africa, we don't see ourselves as an island away from the rest of the continent. And that is what makes this era even much more wholesome for us. And that is why we appreciate very much the move by the continent to appoint us as COVID-19 champions for the rest of the continent, because we can leverage on the BRICS partnership, other partnerships that we have with Europe, with the United States and so on. And we can be at the center and be the catalyst of all this. So indeed, a new era and much more.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. President. The final word today will flow from the final question by Wendell Rolf.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies. My name is Umani Mkize from the BBC. Mr. President, can you please provide an update regarding South Africa's push for vaccine patent waivers at the WTO? And will you continue to push so hard, considering that South Africa now has alternatives, such as this plant, which will be manufacturing vaccines from scratch? Thank you.
The discussions at the WTO are ongoing. They were supposed to hold a meeting, I think, in December or so. That did not eventuate. We will not let up on the demand that we have made. And we are very pleased that India and South Africa, having made the initial call, we've been joined by many other countries around the world, including your big countries like the United States and others. So we are saying that the resistance that is being shown by other countries, particularly Europe, should be whittled down so that they can agree to this, because they have nothing to fear, really. We believe that this will be to the benefit of all. Now, with this initiative here, which we are launching today, it does not mean that our goal has been achieved. We have the rest of the continent. So when we speak not only for South Africa, we speak for countries in the South, the developing economy countries, and especially for our sister countries on the continent, because there are many countries that are ready to take up this ruling that we believe should be done at the WTO. So those talks are going on, and they should go on into the new year, but we will not let up on our resolve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now it will be Wendell Ruth.
Thanks, Aaron. My question is to Dr. Soon-Shiong. Doc, and it's a follow-on from my colleague from BBC, the IP question. How will the IP situation be sort of resolved at NantSA? Does the IP rest exclusively with you and your companies, or how will that be shared, sort of, let's say, with the South African government? Are you going to have sort of an open platform? Will you potentially also have other manufacturers? Would J&J, rival manufacturers, also be able to access the wonderful facility? My understanding is that in some production facilities, it is not exclusively for one. I mean, you can reserve a production line for a different sort of competitor. So I'm just wanting to find out how you guys are going to overcome that, because besides now your wonderful altruism, I suppose, in 20, 30 years' time, there's nothing that potentially prohibits or prevents the next CEO of NantWorks from disinvesting or something along those lines. So, and the second question relates to things about the practical issues of power, electricity, and water as well within the South African context. How are you overcoming these hurdles? I mean, I speak under correction, but I think there is a massive generator outside. Is that one of the things, electricity generator? I speak under correction. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think our strategy has been different. So what we've done through the conglomerate of NantWorks is taken the position that the technology we're going to build should have complete freedom of operation within the NantWorks entities by collaborating and bringing in licensing all the technology needed to develop not only vaccines for COVID, vaccines for HIV, vaccines for TB, and most importantly, vaccines for cancer. So that has been the difference in terms of our strategy, where we're delivering second generation technologies. So NantWorks itself has over a couple of thousand issued patents. So the idea is then to work with organizations like IDRI, that's developed world-class, like 3M, world-class adjuvants, and bring in these technologies so we have complete freedom to operate. These issues of patents shouldn't really then therefore affect us, because then we can do what we need to do on behalf of Africa, on behalf of South Africa, for the good of the continent. With regard to the power and the water, you're completely correct. Within the NantWorks entities, we have a huge division. I'm looking at clean energy. We have a solar division that's looking at next generation solar. We're looking at developing lithium batteries of lithium graphene. And water, we've launched in this country, water from atmosphere, called source water. And we have Jane Simmons, who's in the audience, who's running now to actually implement putting these water panels across the nation. So the opportunity for us as a 21st century technological company to bring that technology here free of any issues of freedom to operate is a real opportunity. I think this facility in the next will be so occupied across infectious diseases and cancer. It's not structured, will not be structured as a contract research facility. That's a good question.
Thank you, Dr. Patrick. And I apologize. I believe our very last question comes from my left field. It's Janice Q of Bloomberg. Janice.
I had a couple of questions. Some of them are follow-ups, effectively, but my first one was, do you see this as going to be the biggest second-generation COVID-19 mRNA facility in the world? And its follow-up type question was just if you could give any further clarity at this point on how much you think this particular part will cost. You've already mentioned the 3 billion rand and the additional 1 billion, but if there's any clarity at this stage. And does this all depend on whether your vaccine gets approval? And maybe if you could just give us a quick update on how that process is going. And my final question was if you could give any further detail on what other vaccines are envisaged and when they might be produced.
Well, thank you for that single question. So let's take them one at a time. I have to unpack a fair amount. This is going to take at least 3 billion because the ambition is large. If you look at that particular unit of clean rooms, one row between these two columns, we already designed that. And our ambition is to put 8 of these rows so that physically we can literally make 1 billion doses of drug substance in this one building alone. We're comfortable we can do that, and the answer to that, and therefore it will then there have been the largest self-amplifying RNA facility in the world. On that basis, then by taking that and adding it to what we call lyophilization, which is the building next door, perhaps, in which we freeze dry it, now it becomes room temperature. And then we do the finish fill. So that continuum is really the ambition. And we obviously planning it, we'll invest what it takes to make that happen. With regard to approval, obviously that is the key, is for us to get this not approved only here, but approved under FDA and EU standards. And we're doing the same trials in US. We're also about to launch these trials in Australia, trials in Botswana, and a trial here in South Africa. Obviously, I'm working very closely with SAHPRA, and it's important not for only SAHPRA to approve it, but for us to get it at a standard level so that it could be exported, because our goal is to build a sustainable industry, not a product, but an industry of biotechnology of 21st century. Get the other question?
I was just wondering what other vaccines are envisaged and when they might be produced.
What other vaccines? Okay, so we're clearly working with TB, we're working on HIV, we're in clinical trials with HIV, but most excitingly, we're in clinical trials now for cancer. So we've just completed our bladder cancer trial, which is about to be filed with the FDA, in which we have 72% complete remission that's now lasting for 2 years. We just reported today on pancreatic cancer trial. We have reports on triple-negative breast cancer trial. I want to now focus on head and neck cancer, cancers that affect Africa, like cancers that are associated with viral infected diseases, such as HPV. I was just having a conversation this morning that HIV patients, patients with TB, and patients who have transplant do not respond well to vaccines because they don't have enough of the immune system. So these are the trials that we are actively pursuing. We have now 13 phase 2-3 trials going on in the United States. Over 1,800 patients have already tried these vaccines. And the idea is to bring them all here, but also focus on diseases that affect South Africa and Africa.
Thank you, Dr. Patrick. I think that brings us to the close of this session, and I'd like to thank our representatives of the media for being part of the session. I thank our panel for your inspired and inspiring responses. We thank you all for being with us today, and I think most importantly, we look forward to being replaced in this venue by the production facilities that will ultimately bring better health to our continent. Thank you all very much. Yeah. Just on, as I talk about the replacement and exiting this venue, we are inviting the podium party to leave first, and then the rest of us will rush outside. Thank you.